Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's our panel discussion on navigating the carbon credit landscape, insights from all the 5 industry leaders. So I'm Kelly Q, the Chief Strategy Officer of Atoz Carbon Cycle Platform, and I'm honored to be your moderator for this session. Before I engage with our esteemed panelists on stage, let me have a very quick introduction on the carbon market of current status. So let's talk about something that's impacting all of us right now. Guess what? It's climate change. I believe all of us in Malaysia, we can feel it become very hot, even become more frequent flooding. So it's not just about the environment. We also feel that our economy, our businesses, and all our livelihoods are all being affected. So with the diesel subsidy cancellation, carbon tax implementation is also on the way in Malaysia. Businesses will soon face more pressure to reduce their carbon footprint. As if that were not enough, the growing emphasis on achieving the net zero targets alongside the need to meet the rising ESG expectations is driving Malaysia companies to seriously consider carbon credit projects and look into this carbon credit market. The question is not whether we need to act, it's how quickly we can adapt and prepare for this. As we navigate this evolving landscape, businesses, especially those corporate sectors, always I get the question, how can we actually ensure that carbon credits we engage with are credible or trustworthy? It's crucial that we not only understand how carbon credits actually works, and also know how to engage with them in a way that aligns with both ethical and also standard long-term business goals. At its core, a carbon credit is more than just a permit. It's a long-term sustainability business commitment. It allows a company to emit a certain amount of greenhouse gases, typically 1 ton of carbon dioxide equivalent. If in today's complex market, it's vital to navigate this space with integrity and even transparency. The concept of carbon credits stems from the international efforts such as Kyoto Protocol and also Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement, for instance, now already including more than 180 countries, including Malaysia, in reduce the greenhouse gas emission and limit the global temperature rises to less than 2 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial level by the year of 2100. This system was actually designed to encourage the emission reduction of all the companies through a market-based approach. The company was actually assigned to give the emission cap and can invest in different projects like carbon capture projects, carbon credits projects that is useful for all the company to generate carbon offsets or even carbon reductions. But with the increasing complexity of the market and the flood of information, so which one is true actually and misleading or accurate? How do we actually ensure that the carbon credits we are involved with are truly impactful and trustworthy? This is where a robust ecosystem of stakeholders become very crucial. That's why we have gathered an expert panel today representing the key pillars across the carbon credit ecosystem. They are here to help us cut through all the confusion, to address the challenges faced in carbon credit project implementation, and even explore the opportunities in the carbon market offers. Please give them the big round of applause, and I will introduce them to all of you. First of all, representing the validation and verification body, we have Mr. Ng Sheng Hua from Bureau Veritas. His organization plays a very critical role in ensuring the integrity and also the credibility of carbon credit projects. Next, we have Mr. Tan Win Sim from WERA, who represents the Carbon Project Registry. WERA's work in a pivotal in maintaining the standards and registering the carbon projects globally. Joining us next will be Mr. Muhammad Rizal Asmi from Bursa Carbon Exchange. He is representing the carbon trade platform. BCX actually facilitates the trading of carbon credits, making the market's transaction more seamless and efficient. Next, we would like to invite Dr. Irina Harun from University Putra Malaysia, representing the carbon data collection from an academic institution perspective. Dr. Irina works actually provides some of the scientific foundation necessary for accurate carbon measurement and reporting. Finally, we have our Mr. Alan Tan from Atoz Carbon Cycle platform, representing the carbon project developer, which link up all the stakeholders in the carbon credit ecosystem, ensuring that the projects are not only developed but also verified, scientifically proven, registered, and only traded. With that, let's move on to the opening statements from each of our panelists, where each of them will provide us on the brief perspective on the current carbon credit market and the future and also the opportunities in Malaysia carbon credit ecosystem. Perhaps we can start with Mr. Ng Shenghua from Bureau Veritas.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. Thanks for the invitation and the introduction. Thanks to everybody here today. I'm honored to be on the stage to share a bit about carbon credits from the VVB's perspective. So for those who do not know, VVB stands for Validation and Verification Bodies. So Bureau Veritas is a almost 200 years old organization, and we are involved primarily in many businesses, including buildings and infrastructure, industry, and certification. So where I'm representing is actually the certification business, and sustainability is part of our portfolio. Now, coming to carbon credits, from our perspective, it is actually an enabler in the industry because for one simple reason, motivation and incentives. Without this motivation and incentives, for economies like ours, okay, who have just embarked on sustainability, would take a longer time to reach the desired outcome. So we are unlike the European countries where most of them are very matured. They have embarked and started on this carbon credit, the sustainability, carbon capture for a long time. But for economies like us, which we have just started, if we want to meet the 2050 goal, okay, or the net zero targets, we need to have something that fast track, okay? So that's the reason why we have, people like Vera, like the stock exchange and the industry players to be part of this, okay? From our perspective as a VVB, we are here to create trust. So we are the gatekeeper of trust. We sell one and only one thing, which is trust, okay? And we are here to contribute to actually 4 major stakeholders. Number 1, the people with the money, the financiers, okay? Number 2, the project developers. Number 3, the registries or the stock exchanges. And number 4, the buyers. So that is where we come in to bridge the gap between the people who has the money and the people who have the projects to create a certain awareness and assurance to ensure that whatever carbon credit that is generated is sold on the market is verifiable and legitimate. Okay, so I think later on we will discuss more about the challenges, opportunities in the Q&A. I'll pass it to the next person, Win.
Thank you, Mr. Ng. So let's have Mr. Tan.
My check. My name is Win. It's easier to just call me Win because I like to say that we like to create win-win situations for everyone. So it's easy to remember, right? Well, just a quick introduction about myself. I'm the regional representative for East and Southeast Asia for Vera. If you're not familiar with Vera, Vera is standard setters. We develop methodologies and we manage programs that certify activities for carbon crediting. Now, having said that, we do not develop projects. That's a major conflict of interest. And at the same time, my role in this region is more on capacity buildings, trying to help the stakeholders in this region to make use of the opportunities from the voluntary carbon market. I'll share a bit more about the current trends later, but I'll pass it back to the moderator first.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Win. Now moving on to Mr. Muhammad Rizal Asmi from Bursa Carbon Exchange.
Thanks very much, Kelly. So perhaps I'll start with a quick summary of Bursa Carbon Exchange. So we started off when the government actually mandated Bursa Malaysia to implement and operate the voluntary carbon market in Malaysia. And hence on the 9th of December 2022, Bursa Carbon Exchange was launched. And just a few months after that, we had our first auction in March 2023, where we auctioned two types of carbon credits. One is a nature-based project from Cambodia, the Southern Cardamom Project. And the other one is a tech-based project from China, the Linshu Biogas Project. And in September of the same year, we launched the continuous trading platform on the exchange. And it's also when we actually announced that we're also going to introduce renewable energy certificates in the exchange, the RECs. So hence, fast forward to 2024, this year we had two auctions. First was the inaugural RECs auction, where we collaborated with Sarawak Energy to get RECs from their Murom hydro plant. And then just a month after that, on 25th July 2024, which is quite a monumental milestone for Malaysia, whereby we auctioned the first Malaysian nature-based carbon credit or carbon project, which is the Kwamut Rainforest Project developed by Permian Global, which is a UK-based project developer, together with the state government of Sabah. It's also a project under the Vera standard. And and moving forward, we're also looking at possibly auctioning another Malaysian carbon credit, which is a tech-based carbon project developed by Monsoon Carbon, and it's going to be a biogas methane recovery project. And this is likely to be sometime in early 2025. So we are still in early stages. It's quite a nascent market. It's still a voluntary market. So I guess my message out to everyone here today is that, feel free to participate in our exchange. We have waived all the fees necessary. There's no onboarding fees. There's no annual fees, maintenance fees, blah, blah, blah. And I guess that's my sales pitch already in my opening remark. So back to the moderator, Kelly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Muhammad Riza Asmi. So moving on to Dr. Irina Harun.
Hello? Hi. Okay, mic check. Hi, everyone. Okay, good afternoon. Thank you, Kelly, for the invitation, and also to Atoz Carbon Cycle for inviting me for this session. I'm here basically, if you heard before from Mr. Mr. Win and Mr. Rizal, these are very prominent figures. We were talking about carbon credit. You might be wondering, why am I here? Okay, so I'm actually coming from UPM. UPM is basically the academic institution that we have been working with Atoz for quite some time. We started previously in the very early stages. We started with microalgae projects. So I'm also with the background of microalgae, just like Dr. Razif. And we are actually looking at the potential of using this microalgae, not only for carbon sequestration, but also for other applications like soil amendments. We're looking at agriculture, and especially I'm wearing the UPM cap today. UPM is the leading university for agriculture in Malaysia. So we are actually really pushing for food security and agriculture, and we are also having a very prominent forestry department, okay, in which I think when we, circa 2020, we started getting a lot of inquiries from industry asking about forestry, because they're thinking about carbon offsetting. So 2020 is when we first started that, and also through RMK 12, we also received a few fundings where we developed some guidelines, green practices guidelines for many different sectors. And we're also working with DOE, Department of Environment, where we look at the environmental compliance and also how we can assess green practices in industries. So all of this accumulated, and at the end of the day, I'm also in the committee for the university sustainability. Okay, and we are actually looking at very rigorously in how we can track our scope 1 and 2 and coming along scope 3. And we are also thinking about how we can actually reduce our carbon emission as a campus. And this is something that is ongoing, and we are also looking at many different avenues. And right now, I'm proud to say that UPM has been holding the title for the greenest campus for the past 10 years. So we are trying to hold on to that because other universities are catching up. Yeah, so very glad to be here, and I'm sure during the Q&A session, we can also share many different approach where we are working on the ground with communities and also basic communities. Yeah, all right, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rina. We are really honored to have you all as our panelists for today for complete the whole carbon credit ecosystem. Last but not least, Mr. Allen, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks, Kelly. Hi, Aaron. Hi, all the panels. I'm Alan. So I will be representing Atoz Carbon Cycle. So let me introduce what's Atoz Carbon Cycle. So basically, we are a nature-based solution company. So what we do is we utilize microalgae and also our black soldier fly as a form of carbon reduction. So at the moment, we are actually developing a carbon project, which is also nature-based as well. So as Mr. Win mentioned before, Vera actually they have methodology. So we are actually using methodology BM0042 in sense of improved agricultural land management. So because we believe that in Malaysia itself that not only we have a lot of nature, pristine land, we actually have a lot of agriculture as well. So we should be utilizing the advantage of Malaysia as because we have so much agricultural land. So the difference between us and other carbon project developer is that we are also a biotech company as well. So we have our microalgae, which we implement. So we can actually put microalgae in the soil itself to increase the carbon percentage. So this would actually help the carbon sequestration in the soil itself. So in a perspective of carbon project developer, we are thrilled to have all the panels here today to share the experiences and give some awareness to the public how the whole carbon ecosystem in Malaysia, we can actually move forward to it.
Okay, cool. So to guide our discussion today, we have prepared a set of key topics that are crucial to understanding to evolve the whole ecosystem and landscape of carbon credit. So I will ask each of the panel to share your opinion on each of the topic. So to begin with the current trends and the innovations in the carbon credit market, the landscape has evolved rapidly, and we have seen many significant advancements and many new technologies around. Could each of you please share your views or some experience on the latest trends and technological advancements that you all are observing? Perhaps we can start with Mr. Ng.
Okay, thanks for the introduction and everybody's sharing. Okay, from the VVB's perspective, right, we are not technology providers, so I won't comment too much on technology, but more on the development of the trends and the standards and the frameworks. So if you can see, right, starting way back 1988 or even before that, there were all these new frameworks that was introduced, like IPCC, right? And then it took 4 years to achieve for UNFCCC to release their framework. And then you have Kyoto Protocol 5 years later. You have GRI, GHG Protocol, so on and so forth. But all of these actually, if you see the timeline, is at 4 to 5 years in between. Takes a very long time. But what happened in the past 3-4 years, the past 3 years in particular, there's so many new frameworks, so many new standards that were released. If it's not new, then it's a refresher, it's an updated version of the previous frameworks. So you name it SBTI, your ISO 14067, 14064, your AA1000, you name it. There are so many that has been released in a short period of time for us to study, for us to learn. Even Vera, Bursa is all learning on this part. So we are going to see more and more of this being released and being introduced. There will be new versions coming out of standards. So I think it's important for the players in the market, the stakeholders, including yourselves, the audiences here, to be aware of all the new development. Okay. Now, touching a little bit on technology. I it's not really something new, but you have seen this, the AI boom, the data centers boom, the new technology, machine learning, and so on and so forth. How is this going to help in the carbon credit market? It's because, I give an example, right? So to sequence or decode the DNA, it used to take days or maybe months through a traditional computer. But now with AI, that's able to actually fast track all these calculations, right? You'll be able, maybe scientists or the researchers will be able to come up with better strain of microalgae or even trees when you're planting in some land, right? That has higher efficiency, all right? So all these are enablers, and we will see, I believe we will see all this coming. But of course, with all this advancement, there's a downside in cybersecurity. So organizations, especially big organizations, need to be very careful with their information, how they protect their organization's data, the sharing of sensitive information, and so on and so forth. I think that's from Bureau Veritas standpoint.
Thanks for your insightful sharing. Perhaps we could hear from Mr. Win from Vera side, because you are develop many methodologies. Perhaps you could encounter a lot of experience on this.
So typically, Vera doesn't comment on the pricing, but man, the current price we look at it is dismal, is terrible. You are unlikely to get a financially viable projects based on the current pricing, at least for most of the projects. For some of the new projects, if you're using new methodologies, the market perceptions might be better. But what does that mean to us in the coming few years? So what we are observed in this region is that there's a trend where the voluntary market merged with the compliance market. And that's not new in Latin America. If we look at just in South Asia, Singapore actually allowed the use of carbon credit. For those who are obliged under their carbon tax, they can use up to 5% to offset their taxable emissions. At the same time, I recall 3 months ago, the Japanese government has announced that they will start accepting international carbon credits from 4 types of projects: CCS, carbon capture storage, direct air capture, bioenergy with CCS, and coastal blue carbons. All this pointing to you have these countries who are highly developed, but they do not have enough emission reductions to achieve their nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement. Now, the Japanese government hasn't announced their compliance market. We don't quite see the pricing yet. But for Singapore, we know exactly how much it is right now. It's 25 Sing dollars per ton. Moving up to 2030, it might go up to between 50 and 80 Sing dollars. Now, this is the most likely future trend we're observing in other countries in Southeast Asia, including Malaysia, which Kelly has mentioned. Carbon pricing, either is carbon tax or ETS. Indonesia has their ETS already. It's a hybrid system, but we're seeing more of these. Will they allow the interactions of carbon credits? I think that's the key question that we should look and answer in the coming few years. Just very quickly as well, regarding the technology developments. In terms of new methodologies, we recently released carbon capture and storage. So that's quite recent. We have new methodologies for afforestation, reforestation, and revegetations. There's one for food waste and food loss. What's in the pipeline right now? We are looking at paddy rice productions, a new methodology which will replace the older one. And there's also transitions methodologies, early retirement of coal-fired plants. So there's a lot of excitement for this region to look at and take advantage of, especially these methodologies to fund decarbonization efforts in this region. I'll stop there. Back to you, Kelly.
Thank you so much, Mr. Win. I think it's really interesting sharing. Perhaps you could share us more in the future. Yep. Moving on to Mr. Muhammad Rizal Asmi. Perhaps you could comment on this based on the opinion from Bursa Carbon Exchange.
Yeah, probably just to add on to what Win was mentioning earlier. When we auctioned the Kwamut Rainforest project back in July, we expected more interest and more take-up actually from corporate Malaysia. But due to various factors, it was not, it gave a very good price discovery. It was a 50 ringgit per ton CO2 for vintage from a combination of vintages from 2017 to 2021. But after the auction from last year, the first auction, corporate Malaysia was asking, why is Bursa not auctioning Malaysian credits? But when it finally came, the take-up was not as, as how much it was expected to be. And so that's where we also announced in our press release that it is actually time for Malaysia to come up with a compliance carbon scheme, either in the form of carbon tax or emissions trading system or a hybrid, combination of both. Because if the carrot doesn't move the needle, then it has to be the stick. So again, it is still in a voluntary phase. So corporates or even SMEs are actually advised to, get used to carbon trading, get used to sourcing for, both carbon credits and RECs, all the different kinds of attributes, in order to improve your decarbonization pathways. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mr. Muhammad Rizal. So moving on to academic institution perspective, our technologist, Dr. Irina, perhaps you could bring some R&D trend that you observe in the carbon storage or any CCU projects you are working on.
Right. In terms of technology, new development of technology, there is a lot actually going on because we, especially in the academic institutions, we are doing R&Ds. Okay, so just to throw a few is going to be a lot lah, basically. But if we're talking about, for example, in the perspective of carbon credit, for example, yeah, currently we are now looking at, for example, data collection, yeah, how we want to collect the data and throughout the whole ecosystem is going to be verified and so on and so forth. So there are methodologies, but how are we going to make sure that the data you get is actually relevant? Is it not, it's actually representing what is happening on the ground? So we have seen many new implementation of technologies. For example, we are using GIS, remote sensing technologies, okay, in terms of how we can reduce work on the ground rather than, everyone just go into the forest or the agricultural land and then it's going to use a lot of labor. But just like what Mr. Ng had already highlighted previously, using AI, using data analytics, this is where we see it is going because we are now in the age where we have a lot of information. But how are we going to analyze that data into something that reflects what is currently happening and actually enhances what we are currently doing? Yeah. So that is one thing that is on the ground. But in terms of the actual technology that we can use for CCS, so I was working with TNB back in 2013, and we are actually looking at, because TNB is one of the power industry, so it's one of the largest producer of carbons, basically. So even back then, like 10, 12 years ago, we are looking at how we can actually reduce the carbon emission. But of course, like what Mr. Win had said and Mr. Rizal had said, back then, there was no carbon tax, yeah? And it's very hard, basically, back then to actually get something off the ground. Yeah, we can do things like pilot study, we can do smaller scale, but to actually implement that in larger scale, back then it was hard. But I noticed now the mentality has changed. Now we see basically because of the global interest in terms of decarbonization, all of the industry are now looking at how we are going to make our company 2050 carbon zero, for example. And even for some ambitious company, they're saying to 2030. Yeah? And we have that aspiration, but how you're going to achieve that is something that requires technology, it requires funding. Yeah, that is one of the largest things, which is why I think when we're talking about carbon credit, that is one of the most how do we say, the best push factor in terms of incentivizing certain projects, because otherwise it won't take off. Because how are you going to generate the funding required to take off a project? So I think maybe I will share more with the after another question later on. Pass over to you back, Kelly.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Irina. I believe, my personal thoughts believe Malaysia carbon market will soon, from voluntary change to compliance, perhaps in 2 years' time. Yeah. So pray for it. Yeah. So moving on to Mr. Allen, perhaps you could share some of the thoughts on this trend.
Okay. I'll start with trending. The current trend is, as you know, Malaysia we have signed the Paris Agreement. So meaning that by 2030, we need to decarbonize by 45%. So this figure is quite a bit, especially for a developing country. So I believe that with the help of all the stakeholders, including all the participants in front of us, that we believe that to make this happen, all of us need to put in effort into it, especially industry as well, because having industry to focus on their own carbon emission and also in a way that try to optimize the reduction. And like previously our panel mentioned that at one point that you optimize and you cannot no longer do reduction, you have to purchase carbon credit to offset it. And especially Singapore as well. Last year, they were only 5 Sing dollar. Now they are 25. And the project goes because they have very clear roadmap, their decarbonization roadmap. So they are very clear. So for us as a carbon project developer, we would try to find technologies that are actually feasible to actually develop the project. Because in a sense that once you develop a project, it all comes into a cost, whether is it efficient, feasible to do the project, because that the credits you generate, would you cost more than you actually develop. So for technology advancement is definitely a lot out there. Like Dr. Irina mentioned, we have LiDAR. There's this thing called soil digital mapping. Mainly you can actually scan the whole land and then compare with a soil sample. Then you can actually see the soil organic carbon. It means that you can actually reduce all the labors and also lab tests as well. It will actually help a lot in reducing the cost price of the project developing. So for my perspective, I reckon that Malaysia will proceed further in, focusing more on the carbon tax or compliance market. And also it will be a great opportunity for companies to actually join in and actually move Malaysia towards the decarbonization plan. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. So thanks for all the insightful insights from all the panels. Moving on to the next topic. So we keep on talk about carbon credit projects since the morning. So now we want to know actually what's the challenges and solution in implementing the carbon credit projects from all of the stakeholders in the carbon credit ecosystem. Because I always get the questions from all our collaborators. Why can't I get the carbon credit within months? Why I need at least years to complete this? Perhaps you all could share some challenges and solution and even some practical experience with all the audience. Perhaps we back to Mr. Ng.
Sure, okay. Let's share a little bit on the challenges, right? I think it's going to be general, not just for agricultural or farmland, but generally in the carbon credit space or sustainability space. If we all look at ourselves in Malaysia right now, comparing with our peers in Singapore, Thailand, Indonesia, okay. Now we have these challenges. Now, the first and most important is literacy. People need to know what they know, or in other words, they don't know what they don't know, right? You are talking to people in the agricultural sector, they need to know what is carbon credit. You tell them, what is carbon credit? What is that? right? So the education has to come, right? We need to build competency, help the people understand on the layman term, how does this work? How does carbon credit work? First, you need to have a project, you need to have follow a certain set of guidelines and standards before you can register, and then monitor it before you can monetize it. That's the simplest way. Maybe Win has a better explanation later, right? So literacy is number one. Number two, we have no clear references. So example, right? You have like Huamud, you have all the different successful projects. Who knows it? We don't know. Not many people know. We all know the sinkhole in Jalan Masjid, India, but we don't know about the projects. So that's the power of media. The media has to actually emphasize more of the need for carbon credits, the need to register a project. You can just do a project, but if you don't monetize it, then what's the point, right? So that is number two. Number three, you talk about double counting or permanence. So in the verification or validation, we are the ones to help to mitigate the double counting and to assure a project that the financing parties will be confident to fund, right? And the project developers will be confident to sell. So that is another area that we need to focus on, which is on the double counting and permanence. Because you talk about nature-based, it's not just 1 or 2 years. You need 5, 10, 15 years, 30 years maybe to grow from start to monitor it. Your trees don't grow overnight, right? So the consistency, the perseverance of organizations has to be there. People may move, right? 30 years later, I may not be here, right? But someone has to continue that effort, okay? And then there are other points, which we can touch base later. But I think the other part I want to touch is on the carbon markets and the process. Now, okay, this goes to Bursa as well. You see, if you want to buy a stock in the stock market, you can just go to your broker online, you look at the price, buy or sell. Carbon pricing is not as direct as that, right? So we need to know, actually, the industry need to know where is this? How do we buy it, right? Just like you have a shelf, the CEO used to mention, we have a shelf of supermarket, but we need to have products on it. So the process of buying and selling the credits needs to be also educated to the public, to be made more well-known, to have the media to cover that more. So I think that's from my perspective on the challenges.
I totally agree with you, Mr. Ng. Yeah. That's why we have the carbon credit ecosystem dialogue for today. We also want to educate and bring more exposure to the public and audience. So we wish to have more such activity to educate the public, to let them more understand why they need to do this. Okay, let's move on to Mr. Win. Perhaps you could add more perspectives on this topic.
I'm going to build on the response by Seng Wah and provide a rather convoluted answers. Maybe I'll start with providing you some context first. If you are developing a tech-based projects, which is anything which is non-nature based, your projects can issue credit minimally up to 7 years. That period can be renewed twice, which means your tech-based project can issue credit up to 21 years, potentially. For Nature's Way project, the minimum periods you can issue credit for is 20 years. And that can be renewed 4 times, which means your project longevity can go up to 100 years. We are talking about long-term financing here. And are we all surprised that the requirements are strict? And let me give you some examples of what are the requirements that we're looking at. Not just because you planted tree, you know exactly how many trees you planted, then you can get carbon credits right away, like in 2 months or within a month. You have to prove that you comply with the local laws. Do you need license? Do you need to get permits? All that, you have to speak with your state authorities or the local governments. You have to put in safeguards to make sure that your project does not impact your surrounding stakeholders negatively. You have to put in plans of mitigations if you are at risk, for example, natural disasters, wildfires, for example. Those are just tips of the iceberg of examples that the requirements you need to demonstrate that you fulfill as per the rules. That's why the project registrations can be too long. And that is something, a point that most people don't realize. They just read about it. I want to get into it right now, today, or at least within a year, which is not possible, especially when you're talking about a project which is large scale, say, for example, 6 digit in hectareage, which right now, I believe Sarawak, there's one project of that scale. That gives you an idea of how complex the project registrations can be. And therefore, it takes time. Apart from that, we will talk about the local systems here. Who are the consultants you can reach out to, or the technical expert when it comes to getting your projects not just registered, get the quantifications correct, which of course I believe the academic institutions can help you, but they probably can't help you with compliance with laws. You need legal experts to do that. So manpower. Manpower is a big issue in this region. Where do you get the experts from? Overseas. And that means you have to pay more. Costs is a big issue because we do not have local talent in this region. At least they are, but they're getting poached left and right by Singapore or Indonesia. So you have several layers of issues there, but I'll stop there because I know Bursa and universities, they can put out more and explain better. Go back to you, Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Win. It's really interesting. So I think, Mr. Rizal, perhaps you could add on to Mr. Win's points.
Sure, thanks very much. So we're talking about challenges, right? Yeah, so I think I can always remember that people always talk about carbon credits as greenwashing because they say that it allows you to emit, it allows you to pollute. I can just continue my business as usual. I'll just buy carbon credits to offset. There is one statistic to show that for all the emissions, fossil fuel emissions specifically, around the world, globally, if all of them were to actually purchase carbon credits, global carbon credits available in the market today, they can only offset 10% of their emissions. That's absolute maximum already for all the companies, all the fossil fuel emitters in the world. So you can't actually offset entirely. And this is where we go to the carbon management hierarchy. So first off is always to avoid as best as you can. Is that travel necessary? Can you do it on Teams, for example? And then you can do your energy efficiency initiatives. You improve your chiller efficiency, you improve your boiler efficiency, compressed air, etc., and aircons and so on. And then you will also do renewable energy, on-site solar, solar rooftop, off-site solar. Now we have CGPP, we have third-party access, SRES and CRES or SRES. And then you will have always residual emissions or hard to abate emissions. And this is where carbon credits play a significant role. And that's where you actually account for all your emissions all the time. So you account for every single emission and you in fact put a price to this emission. You are in a way putting a self-imposed carbon tax, if I may say so, in that perspective. So you are actually putting a price on your carbon. It's like an internal carbon pricing, And according to statistics, I may be jumping the gun here, but there's also a statistic from a research, I can't remember from where, I think MCSI, saying that companies that purchase carbon credits actually decarbonize twice as fast compared to companies who don't actually purchase carbon credits. So that means to say that they stop short of the solar energy efficiency and all that, and then the residual emissions, they just let it be. They just wait for technology to advance, which will take several years. So yeah, I think that's my take. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Rizal. Perhaps we could move on to Dr. Irina.
Okay, just would like to share, because we're talking about challenges, just to share from the perspective of the academia in terms of the university. So I'm sure that you all know that we are doing R&D as one of our bread and butter in the universities. One of the things is always about the funding. Nowadays, all of the projects that we are doing is actually we have to look at the sustainability. We are looking at the real life situation. We're looking at the industry, what the problems they're facing. We're looking at communities. what sort of problems that they are facing right now. We're trying to solve that and align that to the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. Because whatever development that we're doing, we want to make sure that it's environmentally safe, is also economically sound, yeah, and at the same time, we are also taking care of the people. It's no longer just one thing only. We're not only talking about just looking at R&D for the sake of it, yeah. But saying that, yes, problem is always funding. Funding is one thing, but at the same time, one of the challenges I just want to share with you guys in terms of one of the interactions that we had previously with many of the communities, because in UPM, we are not only doing R&D, we are also doing service learning as well. What I mean when I say service learning is actually we bring our students to the ground, okay, and we help to solve the problems in the community. So for example, we went to Janda Baik in Pahang, okay. That's one area which is very prone to flooding, okay. And we go there because I'm from the Department of Environment, okay. We go there and we look at what is the disaster mitigation plan that we can develop for that community, okay. And throughout the project, we are looking at, okay, there are some problems, there are some issues, of course, in terms of climate, okay, we are actually seeing the climate impacts on the ground. But sometimes people don't really see it as climate punya disaster. They don't really link it. But they used to say, okay, 20 years ago, this never happened. This one is always like this, like that. And through this engagement, okay, to the public, okay, that is how we can actually bring one of the things that was highlighted before in terms of education, in terms of how we can actually help to educate people. Because if in the first place, if they don't even know what is climate change, what is all of this, okay, they don't really feel the need where they need to do something about it. Okay, this is talking like really from the ground level. Of course, in terms of corporate, we already have that because we already have almost like a stick now. They're no longer carrot anymore. Yeah, almost like a stick. So the awareness there is quite good. But in terms of the public awareness is still quite low. And we see this not only in Malaysia. Okay, a few weeks back, I had attended a session where we talk about the Southeast Asia and the South Pacific. So we had some presentation from the Solomon Islands, and they were talking about sustainability versus logging, because one of their main industry is actually logging, okay? And they know, yes, this is something that they have to reduce, okay? But when they talk to people on the ground, still the same issue. It's still about the awareness, okay? Which is why this is very, very important. We may see it just as we have to do it, yeah? But if we don't have the passion, the motivation to do it, we cannot mobilize everyone on the ground. Okay, we want to change something, we have to make sure that the whole world change with us, not just 1 or 2%. Okay? Not to say that this is not good. We had engagement before as well with one company, a furniture company, and the CEO was very forward thinking, was really looking at sustainability. And even before all this green certification, you know, in terms of MGTC has its own green certification, if I'm not mistaken. So even before that time, he already has, you know, the products is already following all of the specs, is very sustainable, locally sourced, all of those. Yeah? So that is saying from top down. If we have the top down thinking, the motivation, that is very, very good in terms of how the products, the people are going to be. So this is what we envision. We are trying to, I think it's good that we have all the stakeholders, not all, most of the stakeholders that are looking at different areas. Okay, so this is one thing that is really, I think, starting the ball rolling. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you, Dr. Irina. I do agree. We must close the gap between all the stakeholders to complete the whole ecosystem. So perhaps now we could move to Mr. Allen to wrap it up for this topic.
Okay, thanks, Kelly. As a project developer, one of the biggest things for us is land. Without land, pretty much there's no project at all. So one of the challenges that we have is always the engagement with the farmers, the landowners. Because when we approach them, if you tell farmers that, hey, I'm gonna help you do something for the environment, they will say why? Because for them, they cannot comprehend how the environmental impact to their own agricultural land as well. But from all the interviews that we did, the engagement all we did, we realized that throughout the years, they have bad crops. Because that it's not just that they're not doing anything. They try their best, but it's one of the reason is because the weather, the climate, because it's actually getting much hotter. There's droughts, there's less water, and then even apart from using a lot of chemicals, it's just that the environment actually affecting their crops as well. So when we actually engage with the landowners, we have to make it in a way that we are helping them to improve, meaning that they are improve their income first, reduce their costs, then only we come to the sense that we bring, you can do all this while helping the environment. That will be more palatable for them as well. The next challenges, as Win mentioned before, we Malaysians, we have a lot of talents here. But unfortunately, it's actually quite hard to keep talents as well. They're being pushed by, I mean, if they're really good, they get pushed by bigger companies or overseas. And this is one of the reasons that we work closely with UPM. We will always ask, like Dr. Irina and Dr. Razif say, hey, do you have any good talents that we can actually pull into our company and work together? And we also believe in building this talent pool as well. So we, a bit advertisement, we are open up to any universities that have good talent. I mean, if you're interested in common projects or microalgae, feel free to contact us. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. I really appreciate all the insights from all the panels for this topic. So I think personally, I really agree with all of you. Like Mr. Win just now mentioned, cost will be the first priority challenges that we face in developing carbon project. And also manpower issue, labor issue, and need to compliance with all the legals. So it's really not the easy way like getting the carbon credits within the months or weeks or days. It's really spend time and really need to bring in all the efforts and join hands with all the stakeholders. So moving on to the last topic, topic 3. This is which is quite linked with the previous topic. How to ensuring the integrity and scams. Yeah, previously from my real life experience, when a client approached me, why people can do within months? Why people can do within 1 year? You need at least 3 to 10 years. It's not possible. So I think we will let all of the panels to solve this for us. Yeah. So start with Mr. Ng, perhaps.
Okay, on this part, yeah, it says ensuring integrity and avoiding scams. I don't know what kind of scam we're talking about, telephone, credit card scams. No, but okay, anyway, one of the thing that you mentioned, Kelly, I think is very important, right? Is like I mentioned just now, literacy. People need to be educated. If you are educated, you are trained, you go through life, real life experience. Maybe you have been scammed before, then you know how to avoid that, right? But from the VVB's perspective, I think it's more of like, you need to understand, okay, educate yourself on international standards, the development of the frameworks. What are the latest methodology from WERA? Okay, what is the latest from the regulators like Bursa, right? And then international standards, educate yourself, get yourself updated. That's number one. Number two, understand your local regulators. Local regulations would be slower compared to international development because usually they adapt to international standards or frameworks. So also you need to work with your local regulators, understand is it legitimate or not, right? And then number 3, of course, this is like, what we mentioned, a bit of selling, engage reputable international verifiers. Because to be frank, in Malaysia, there are some local companies who claim, oh, I can verify, I can validate your project. But when you really look into their history, probably 4 or 5 years in the market, and they don't have really actual projects. For us, Bureau Veritas, we are about 200 years in the market. We have not, we are involved in many, many sectors, so we get our hands dirty. Right? So engage a reputable verification body to help so that, you have a high level of confidence. Your stakeholders have a high level of confidence. So that is one. Tips on how stakeholders can protect themselves. I think I mentioned really educate, get yourself. And for the financiers, for the regulators, I think it's important to do thorough technical due diligence. That's very important. So do your homework. If you don't do your homework, then you are prone to be scammed. Okay, I think that's from me. Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Ng. Yeah, so everyone, please do homework before commit to new assignment. Yep. Moving to Mr. Win, you can contribute to this topic.
So I'll try not to call names and accuse them of being scam or borderline scam. That will be out of my scope. But let me share with you, this is a real experience. A couple months ago, I received an email or a WhatsApp chat and asked me, Win, planting pineapples can get credits. Then I asked, what kind of project are you talking about? The trees themselves that you grow, which you plan to cut down at a later stage, after you harvest the pineapple, you can't get credits. Unless you're thinking about doing something regarding the agriculture practices, like changing the fertilizers. But planting the pineapples themselves don't get you credits. Then I'm like, where do you get this information from? But there's another standard say they can, and avoid your credits and call this green credits, yellow credits from the soil as well. I'm like, I'm totally perplexed. Vera doesn't have any methodology for such activities. No, then I'll have to say those are against the principle of carbon credits. So where do you get the reference to check? I will recommend there are 2 potential sources you can look at. One is the ICVCM, Integrity Council on Voluntary Carbon Market. They are a governance body at international levels, make up of a lot of industry players who determine what is considered high integrity. That's one. Another one is the United Nations ICAO, International Civil Aviation Authorities. And they look at what is considered eligible to be used as offset for the international airlines. And standards can apply to them to prove themselves that they meet these strict requirements, and therefore it's a form of integrity and qualities. Now, I'm not saying that in this region we've heard a lot of many startup standards who say or who claim they want to work around the long processing time by all these leading standards, but they will have to prove themselves through some of these options first before, if you want to commit to them. I can't comment on that. Best of luck. So the second point I want to bring up is the amount of disinformation spread around these days. This is related to what I mentioned earlier, like planting pineapples can get you carbon credits. Good luck with that, yeah. Also, it's not helpful when you have so-called experts who have no background whatsoever in carbon projects development, and then come up knocking your door that, yes, by doing this, you can get carbon credits. Please do your due diligence. If you come to me and ask who can do the projects, I can't do that. I can't endorse any names. You have to do your due diligence. Check their background. Have they done and registered projects before? So if it's too good to be true, yeah, most of the time. Back to you, Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Win. Yeah, so planting pineapple cannot get credits. Please note that. Yep. Moving on to Mr. Rizal. Yep. Perhaps you could share some experience that you encounter.
Sure.
Yep.
Thanks, Kelly. Perhaps I'll share a story that I came across, this was actually during Bursa's first Malaysian Carbon Market Forum last year. I wasn't in Bursa yet, I was on the way. Win was still there. So I met with this guy, I will name which company. He's the chairman of that company, a plantation company, quite a big plantation company. Hope it's not here.
Listed.
Huh?
Listed.
Listed. Okay. Okay, so anyway, I was talking to him during networking discussions, and he just came up to me and said, you know, all these carbon credits, it's like crypto, you know. Why crypto? You know, I was still getting used to carbon credits at that time. Then he said, you know, it's like crypto. You know, the price is volatile. You know, there's no fix. There's no trend and all that. Like very volatile kind of transaction. So that was the first challenge. Like I had, okay, I'm going to BCX and I have to face this kind of this kind of allegations. So along the way, I've only been in BCX for what, 8 months about. We've been called scam, we've been called fraud, of course greenwashing, like I mentioned earlier. There's a lot of attacks on us. We are actually part of Bursa Malaysia. Everyone knows, I guess, everyone in Malaysia knows Bursa Malaysia actually regulates the capital market. And we are also governed by Securities Commission, we're regulated by Securities Commission, of course not in the carbon market space. But that being said, we are still having to follow a lot of the requirements imposed on the capital markets as well. So we do have to do a lot of due diligence, even when it has been through various, methodologies, the process went through all the checks through the VVBs. We still have to do our own internal due diligence before we can actually onboard a project into our platform. So we do have extensive requirements, and it's also not easy to actually get carbon credits on board. Even as a participant, I guess there's some participants here who have or currently going through the onboarding process. So there are some strict requirements. It is a bit of an entry barrier, but at the same time, it also allows us to do necessary KYC process to ensure both supplier as well as the buyer are legit and avoid scammers and frauds and things like that. Thanks. Back to you, Kelly.
Yep. Once again, I think it's really need to do due diligence. This is serious, so we need to check all the background before you really commit and invest in a project or start the project. So moving on to Dr. Irina, based on the academic institution perspective, how to avoid the scams or monitoring tips you could share to us?
Okay. In terms of scam, if it sounds too good to be true, then perhaps it is not true, basically. So we see, we at UPM, maybe not, we didn't get as much, people come to us and, selling some ideas because we are not the funder. Okay? The money doesn't come from us. But what we can usually what we see in general is that people come to us basically to first get some information. Okay, this is what we always see, because I think it's good that everyone has been talking about due diligence, because that is the first thing that you have to do. Due diligence is not just about the background of the company, how feasible the technology is, how you can actually utilize it in long term, short term, what is the scale that is is developed on, is it going to be applicable in the large scale? All of that has to be taken into account. You cannot just simply thinking that, oh, this has potential, let's go all in. Don't do that. Yeah, because we really need to see, even if we're doing things in the lab, for example, I'm just going back to pull back a bit, going back to the R&D side. If you do things in the lab, for example, we have to imagine that this is a very controlled situation. Yeah? So I don't know if you, any of you have heard the story about Elizabeth Shaw. This is the, in terms of so she made, I think, millions, perhaps billions of dollars, selling and basically an idea, not even a technology yet, but because people see the potential. It's like, wow, this is very novel. This is very interesting, because she was pushing for a technology in terms of the genetic scanning, terms like that. So it was supposed to be very, something very novel in the healthcare industry. Okay, just imagine you just drop a drop of blood and you see already what is your health, what is your future, in terms of the diseases that you get. So, this is it sounds too good to be true. Yeah? But she made billions of it. So imagine, if we put ourselves in the shoes of the common people, this is basically what scams are. We are presenting to them an ideal situation, okay, giving them the potential of making money right off. And people are going to flock to that idea, just like fireflies to a lamp, for example, because we are always looking at very easy, benefit, for example, yeah. And it's human nature. It's human nature. We are, we are built like that. Our metabolism is like that. Yeah? Why do we walk if we can drive? Yeah, I'm glad that Mr. Riza had walked here from his office. It's one thing.
Less than 10 minutes away.
Less than 10 minutes away, yeah? But if we 2 hours, maybe not. Okay? So we are built like that. Yeah? So if any of you found, some carbon developer, project developer coming to you and say, oh, I can build this project for you, you can get the ROI within 6 months. Please be mindful. Please have a look at, please be very, very critical in terms of how are you going to do that? Nobody has done that. Yeah? And I guess that's very much how we are looking at this from the academia as well, because for us, we are not for profit. Yeah, we are not for profit. So that's why we have been working closely with Atoz as well. So in terms of the technical validation, we are doing that basically because it's one of the options. You may have other options, okay, but do your due diligence, because at the end of the day, we want the project to take off and be successful, not just stop, midway and then everything is convoluted like that. Okay, hand over back to you, Kelly.
Thank you, Dr. Irina, for your valuable input. So moving on to Mr. Allen.
Okay, thanks, Kelly. I think all the panels pretty much cover most of the misinformation and all the stuff. So I'll just share one of the experience that I had. Pretty much, I think past few months that, because if you've been long enough in like the carbon credit ecosystem, you would somehow hear some misinformation. So one of the companies came up to me, then they were explaining, say, hey, you are a natural-based project developer. I'm a technology-based. Then I'll say, oh, great. Let's have, to build the whole ecosystem, we will welcome more Malaysian carbon project developer. Then he presented a methodology where he's helping data center to get carbon credits. That is actually sound very interesting. Then I was asking how, because in my understanding is that data center would consume a lot of energy. Then how would you get credits? Then we'll say they will do a baseline where how much energy the data center is getting. Then they install solar. Yes, I have the same expression as well. So basically is they are just do a baseline by improvement the efficiency, whether you use lesser energy. For me, that's that's not really carbon credits, but I wish him good luck, and that's the only thing I can say is just when especially investor, when you invest in a carbon project or you adopt or company that want to do offset with a carbon credit, so make sure that you do your KYC and also understand what's the principle of the methodology itself. Then you can know whether it's feasible. Like all the panels have said, if it's too good to be true, then it's probably not. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. So no too good to be true. Please, everyone, please check and do your background check when you want to do the project investment. Now moving on to the last topic that we just touch a bit on the opening statement, the role of each stakeholders. So perhaps after this topic, we will move on to Q&A session that we collected from the registered participants. Okay, first, I would like to ask your opinion on this topic, Mr. Ng. What's the role of VVB in carbon credit ecosystem to let audience more understand?
Thank you, Kelly. So the role of VVB, it's like I mentioned earlier on, right? We have on one spectrum, the end of the spectrum, we have the project people with the people with the money, financiers wants to invest in green projects. Their question will be, where are the projects? Can I trust those projects? On the other end of the spectrum, there are the people who develop projects. Okay, and then in between, there are the regulators, there are the registries. So for us as a VVB, we are here to bridge the gap. We give assurance and confidence to the the people with the money that, okay, this project that you are looking at, we have validated them, or we have verified them, and it's legitimate. Okay, for the party on the other end, when they are talking about, oh, I have my project, this is my project, it's green, I can do this, you can get a credit. Now we are there to also validate whether is this true or not. Because our part is just to be impartial. We are not going to be biased to anybody, but there to provide that assurance and assurance to the compliance of standards, methodologies, regulators. Then the other part, when we come, in the traditional thing is that for VVBs, we provide certification as simple as your ISO 14000 environmental management system. Of course, there are many other standards that you can look at, even to the effect that, I have one case. A pharmaceutical company came, say, oh, I have this pill, this medicine. I want to calculate the carbon footprint for this. It can happen. Every single thing, even your iPad, your phone, your Apple Watch, is like carbon neutral now, right? So this is where we come in as validation and verification bodies. So we are here to provide the assurance and the compliance and to build trust, as I mentioned earlier on. Thanks, Kelly.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ng. Just like ISO 14064, all the validation can be done by VVB, but in the carbon credit ecosystem. So moving on to Mr. Win, Vera, as the role of carbon project registry on the methodologies building. Yep.
Thanks, Kelly. And actually, I like to thank Sing Wai as well, because his response make my answers more simple. Well, to begin with, Vera developed methodologies. And the word methodologies, what it means is, in a nutshell, what are the eligible activities? So not all activities automatically qualify for carbon crediting. Only certain activities are. So methodologies, that's where we highlight the eligible activities. How do you quantify them? What are the carbon pools that you need to take into considerations? That's something that we'll highlight in the methodologies as well. And then, of course, there's the further requirements of safeguard, community engagements, how frequent you need to engage your stakeholders, what are the mechanisms you need to put in place. Those are the rules we put in place and we set up, and with public consultations as well. So that's quite clear. Project methodology development and then maintenance of the program rules. Coming to the next stage, Vera doesn't go on ground to audit those projects. Those are done by such as Bureau Veritas themselves, a VVB, a validations and verifications bodies. They are the ones who are recognized by Vera to go on ground to do the audits, do the checks. They submit reports to Vera, then Vera check the completeness of those reports. So it has to be clear here, because the role is different, to ensure independence reviews, to reduce the conflict of interest. Therefore, Vera doesn't audit projects. I have to be very clear. Very different roles. That's played by third parties. And at the same time, of course, capacity building is always on our radar, that we work very closely with government officials and then, of course, stakeholders such as yourself. That's why we're here today to tell you some of the carbon market stuff. That should be all for me.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Win. So moving on to another, our carbon trade platform representative, BCX.
Thanks, Kelly. Yeah, so as our name implies, we are a carbon exchange, but we don't just do carbon credits, we also do RECs. So we are not just operating the exchange. The mandate given to us by the government is actually to develop the carbon market. So we also assist on the project development side. We also look at engagement with the regulators, with various ministries. So we have people looking at all the different aspects of a carbon market. We are also involved in a study currently by Ministry of Finance together with World Bank, looking at a compliance carbon scheme, which is supposed to end at the end of 2025, for example. So, of course, for me personally, I'm looking at the trades itself, the liquidity of the exchange. So we have to look at developing the whole ecosystem, not just the exchange in itself. And for us, we are looking at both carbon credits and RECs, mainly because they are both offerings which are used to offset Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 emissions. And it's a complementary role for them. So for carbon credits, we are at the moment adopting the Vera standard, but we're also going to adopt gold standard at the end of this year. So we accept both nature-based and tech-based projects from vintage 2016 onwards. And we're also doing RECs under the IREC standard. There are no restrictions for you to participate. You do not have to be a PLC company. You can be a private company, SME company, as long as you go through our KYC or onboarding process. Then you are eligible to become a participant of BCX and trade carbon credits and RECs. So yeah, I guess that pretty much sums up what we do. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rizal. Moving on to Dr. Irina, the role of UPM in this carbon credit ecosystem.
Okay, I'm just going to share because in terms of the academia, okay, if we look at the whole project as a whole, and we split it into the upstream and the downstream, upstream being within the project while we are basically, how do we say that? Sorry, let me catch my thought. If we focus on the first part, yeah, which is where we develop the project, but before we can develop that, there must be something that we are looking at in terms of the R&D. So this is where the academic institution comes in, because we actually have a lot of technologies, we have a lot of experts. The only problem is sometimes to get that gap together, because we have the gap between the industry and also from our expertise in the academia. Because sometimes, I always hear this, sometimes we, in the universities, we are working in silo. Sometimes that's what one of the criticism that when we do the engagement with industry, and some of the issues as well is that what we are developing is not applicable to industry sometimes. That's what one of the key challenges. But basically, we are trying to streamline this process. We are looking at how we can actually market some of our existing technologies. Yeah? So in terms of the CCUS, for example, we have many of the technologies in terms of that can be used in different industries. So if we're specifically talking about the agriculture, for example, and I'm sure some of you has been through the exhibition area where we have Dr. Arina. Dr. Arina is working with Atoz as well in terms of trying to apply the microalgae to the soil. And we are looking at how we can amend the soil. And that is part of the Vera methodology that is already existing. Yeah, there is one application where we can actually use the existing technologies into developing a product. That is the first part of it. Throughout the project, yeah, how we can actually look at the data collection, how we can actually make sure that the data is, you are using the correct machines, for example, is it calibrated, so on and so forth. We may not think about it, but in the validation, in the verification, they're actually looking at that. Yeah. Okay, you get this data. Okay, what is the equipment's use? Yeah, what is it calibrated, so on and so forth. Those are the questions that perhaps our farmers may not realize. That's why we come in. When we're looking at the methodology, we are really looking at how we can detail that out and make it understandable to the layman. Because that's where the gap is. The knowledge gap is there. It's not just from the academia to the industry, but also to the public as well. We are trying to fill that gap in terms of how we can engage all of the stakeholders. Okay, but we're trying to make sure that we are not over-promising as well. Because in terms of UPM, for example, we will not claim that we can do everything. Perhaps you may work on something. I see colleagues from UKM as well at the back. Some of the things, UKM may be the champion in that. Yeah, we can work with UKM. But with UPM, there are some of the niche areas where we can work on. So I really like this, public-private partnership where it's sort of a complete ecosystem. Yeah, we all feed one another. Yeah, everyone has their own role, and we are looking at this as a complete ecosystem. Yeah? So I think that's about it from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Irina. I think, Mr. Allen, you could wrap it up.
Okay, thanks, Kelly. As the name project developer, it means we develop the project itself. So one of our job is actually engage with all the stakeholders involved. So meaning all the panels here as well. So and also what we need to do is not just, especially Atoz, what we do is not just project documentation and all those stuff. We mainly involved in the implementation process as well, as we are utilizing our advantage, which we are using microalgae as a form of increasing the soil organic carbon, and also as a form of GHG avoidance in the sense of replacing synthetic chemical fertilizers. So all of this for project developer is that we are trying to build the whole ecosystem, like Rizal, Mr. Ng, and also Win mentioned, is mainly that we try to get everyone involved in building a project where we believe that the project is not only can impact economically for the farmers and even the investors and stuff, we also believe in social impact as well. So because the idea of a carbon project is not just to help the environment, it also to be able to have social impact, where the beneficial of the landowners or the projects is able to help people that is involved in it. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. That's why I always believe one people is limited force, but with all the stakeholders, we can form it with more quality carbon credits projects from all the industry experts. Thank you all for sharing your expertise on these 4 critical topics. It's really been a rich and fruitful discussion for me. I believe our audience as well. So now let's turn to our audience questions. So we have received some of the excellent and thoughtful ones from our registered participants. So after filter, perhaps I would, due to the time constraint, I would just touch few. All right, so first question. I think I will be directed to Mr. Win. Since you are the WERA is the International Carbon Project Registry body which is verified. So what are the most common issues you encounter in Malaysia or Asia that could compromise the integrity of carbon credit validation?
I actually think that question is better taken by Sengwa, but I'll touch on another aspect of the project developments in Southeast Asia in general, which is the skills of projects. Now, we are working very closely with most stakeholders, such as farmers. What you get in terms of the potentials for a project is quite limited, because your project areas typically are quite small. there are fixed costs that you can't avoid. So you must reach a certain, I should say, project scale or project size before your project is commercially viable. Fortunately, there are workaround solutions around it. There are concepts what we call multiple instances of project activities. But if I can translate that into layman terms, it's basically you can have several patches not jointed together, disconnected project area, and register in one project. You are not restricted to a standalone project, which is typically the case when people think about a carbon projects, where you only have one stakeholders, one landowners, and one project, and which a large patch of land. That might be true for listed companies in the oil palm sectors, but for agriculture, especially when we talk about vegetables and others, unlikely. So you can actually combine them and get them registered, and therefore reach the required minimum skills required. Another concept is called the group projects. It's similar, except if you intend to expand your project later at any stage of your project, maybe in the second stage after you secure enough funding, then you go for group projects if you intend to expand. So I'll stop there, and so that Seng-Hwa can take on the integrity of your validations.
Yep. Perhaps Mr. Ng, you could further elaborate on this because Bureau Veritas is also one of the international validated VVV body. Yep.
Yeah, I think, in terms of validation or verification per se, we need to understand, for us, is coming to understand the project from the feasibility stage right up to, whoever claims it can be done in certain ways. Or maybe, example, you say, oh, I could offset so many tons of carbons to generate this credit. So for us, integrity-wise, is about, having the people within the stakeholders or the people within the projects to be true and honest with us when we do the audits and perform the gap analysis. When we validate the design, we look at all the aspects in the technical aspects. Commercially, of course, we don't get into commercial because that is not our business. But on the technical aspect, the standards, how do we ensure the integrity is to really look and compare it apple to apple. We are not there to do a subjective, give a subjective comment, but it's really objective. What you see is what you get. So that is something that what we do in terms of validation and verification.
Thank you for that, Mr. Ng. Let's turn our attention now to next question to Mr. Muhammad Rizal Asmi. How can corporations balance the pursuit of carbon neutrality with the need to support local communities involved in carbon credit projects?
Okay, I think if you're looking at local community, this is mainly talking about forestry projects, nature-based solution kind of projects. A good example is the Kwamut Rainforest Conservation Project, which is quite a sizable 83,000 hectare project. There is actually no one living in the forest area itself. But I guess, if I'm not mistaken, the nearest village is about 10 or 20 kilometers away. But the project proponents, the developers, they actually have done a lot of engagement with all the local communities. They provided improvements in terms of their livelihood. And that's why the project is also earning the additional labeling called co-benefits, the Climate, Community and Biodiversity Labeling, or CCB for short. And I guess I can say that for the Kwamut project, it's also one of the, what we call as a lighthouse project for Malaysia. Because if you're looking at transitioning from the fossil fuels towards a more sustainable or greener economy, then we need to look at replacement of revenue from fossil fuels to potentially forest projects, for example. So this is where these kind of projects can actually help, and at the same time improves the livelihoods of the community. And I think Kwamut had like 8 or 10 villages around it. And yeah, there's a lot of very good engagement done by the project developers, because they also work with the local NGOs, Pakostras, SIRP, and so on, and really go to the ground and understand what are the requirements of the settlement areas around the project.
Thank you, Mr. Rizal. Perhaps Mr. Allen, you could add anything on this question, since carbon project developer is also involving in building community engagement.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Rizal, for the insight. Because we engage with a lot of farmers, we realize that sometimes for them to actually make money out of the crops is very hard these days. One mainly the issue is that the yield is not as good as previously due to the climate or their practices. For us is we try to make them understand, because in any project under Vera, I believe that we have to do the awareness first. For us to engage the community, for them to know that if we were to use their land for projects, they need to aware how is it being utilized and they can get the credit. So we also need to plan some sort of like a project plan investment for them. There's an idea of that the revenue generated from the carbon credit would be used for their sustainability as well. So it's not just giving money to the farmers itself. So for us, we believe that social engagement and also educating them would actually benefit them in the long run, especially if in Malaysia one of our biggest industry is agriculture. So for us not to actually leverage the advantage that we have is quite sad. So that's why we believe that not just pristine forests, we believe that agriculture land, if we actually go through all the education, the knowledge transfer, we are able to actually help the farmers first to increase their income. Second, actually to help the environment as well.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. I saw another interesting questions from our participants as well. I think this question will be directed to Dr. Irina. Given the global shift towards nature-based solutions, what role do Malaysia's rainforests, agricultural land, and biodiversity play in the carbon credit market? And how can they be better integrated into these initiatives?
Okay, in terms of NBS, nature-based solution, I think we're looking at this in a global term. A lot of this, we see the shift going into nature-based solution. And nature-based solution has many definitions. If we're talking about the UN has its own definitions, IUCD has its own definitions, World Bank has its own definition. But what is similar with all of this is that we are looking at ecosystems, how we can actually enhance, how we can protect and basically rehabilitate existing ecosystems that can further benefit the people surrounding it. So in terms of, if we're talking about forestry, of course, some forests have people, but if we're talking about agricultural land, the farmers, for example, we're talking about, we also have quite big aquaculture, I guess, in Malaysia, the aquaculture industry. So I just would like to share one of the experience that I've had previously when we're talking about aquaculture. There's one where, I don't know if you guys know, we want to prawns is in the mangrove area, for example, yeah? So if we want to enhance or we want to protect the mangrove areas, one of the ways is a lot of people are looking into mangrove replanting. And this is moving more towards the blue carbon, basically. And through this initiative, there are ways where we not only we can preserve the mangrove areas, because mangrove is not just one of the biggest carbon sinks, if we're talking about carbon as such, but it's also very, it protects our coastal areas. It gives protection. And the ecosystem around this area is very, very much sensitive towards the changes in climate. So if we don't protect these areas, okay, not only the aquaculture industry are going to suffer, the shrimp farmers are going to suffer in terms of that, but it also going to affect not only the people, but the ecosystem as well. So one of the engagement I had before with KI, Conservitas Indonesia, they are trying to have some areas in the Kalimantan area. They're trying to replant mangrove. And this is basically to help the shrimp farmers not only looking at their industry, and not only they're going to get the shrimps, but at the same time, they're also protecting the coastal areas. And how this can be done is actually is through partnerships of many different stakeholders. We have the academia coming in to provide the technology solution. We have the NGO where they do the on-the-ground interactions between the community and also all the other stakeholders. Okay. The project itself, we have the carbon developer, the project developer, and that is for sure there will be going to be VVBs. This is not carbon credit yet. Yeah, we are still at the initial stages, but just sharing with you the progress in terms of how this can further changes. Yeah, that is in Indonesia. We're looking at Malaysia. Maybe similar. There's some similarities, yeah, in terms of our level on knowledge in terms of the farmers, but we see with Atoz and also with other engagements with the public, we are getting more and more support in terms of this. So hopefully it could take off.
Thank you so much, Dr. Irina. So I think due to time constraint, let's have a quick one. I think this question is quite suitable for all the panels. How are companies leveraging carbon credits to not only offset emissions, but also create value for stakeholders? Perhaps we could start with Mr. Rizal.
Yeah, I guess I mentioned this before already. But first off, perhaps value is quite subjective, depending on which stakeholder you're talking about. But to the end user, to the buyer, of course, when you purchase carbon credits, you can actually use it to offset your scope 1, scope 2, or scope 3 emissions. And as I mentioned before, studies have shown that companies who actually purchase carbon credits actually decarbonize twice as fast as compared to companies that don't. And this is mainly because of the principle of accounting for all the emissions, meaning that carbon offsets is actually one of the tools that you can use to decarbonize your company's emissions. So to borrow from one of my ex-colleagues, he says in the carbon market today, we need to do everything, everywhere, all at once. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rizal. Perhaps, Mr. Win, you could add on some point to this.
Just very quickly on something additions to what Rizal has mentioned earlier, is that corporates, at least for certain corporates these days, they would like to go beyond carbon. They're not just focusing on the word carbon itself or greenhouse gas emissions. They want to be seen as supporting local communities and even funding biodiversity benefits that come from our projects. So what Rizal has mentioned earlier is the additional certifications that one projects can apply for. But at the same time, those are for nature-based projects. For tech-based project, you can look at SD Vista. What it means is Sustainable Development Goals. If you meet any of the 17s, then you can go for such certifications, which, if I can give an example, there's one project that provides scholarship for the local communities. Another one has diet programs to support local communities for the youngsters, gender equalities, women empowerment, life above land, life below water, etc., etc. All these can be quantified and get additional certifications, and certain corporates will only support such projects or buy such credits. So I'll pause there. Back to you, Kelly.
All right. Quite a good insight. So I think maybe Mr. Ng, you could add to this, or Mr. Allen?
Okay, just to okay, just 2 minutes or maybe 1 minute. I think to add on to the how aside from carbon credits and how it's going to add value for organizations depends. For example, for public listed companies, right, how they add value is to their stakeholders, to their shareholders. At the end of the day, they talk about the earnings, and what dividend you're going to get, what kind of growth you're going to get, and in order to do that, you need to involve in a lot of things, not just carbon, like Win mentioned. They talk about ESG, right? Environmental. You are talking about environmental here. Then there's a social part where we talk about, the livelihood of people, the well-being, gender equality, the pay gap, right? Women, importance of women at work. Then you have the governance part when you talk about anti-bribery, you talk about information security. So these are the things that comes in together and helps these organizations get their ESG rating. Okay, whether they are scored by Moody or S&P or whoever, they want that rating. It's important for them. So I think that's one of the value. For maybe for SMEs or non-public listed companies, they would have generate values, I think, for their stakeholders somehow, somewhere, I do not know where, but there would be some values that they can generate along the line, whether for communities, whether for their for government agencies or for academia. It's really it's not limited, not exhaustive. So I think that's more that will come along the way. And I think maybe the next time we have any forums like this, there'll be more examples to be shared.
I think just to add, I think one more thing that's banks are also looking at ESG scores, right? So the ability to get loans or getting lower interest loans is also contributing to that. Yeah.
Right, you're right.
Thank you so much to all the panelists. I think due to time constraint, so we need to stop our Q&A session. And really thanks for all the contribution for all the panelists and all the audience that stay with us until the end as well. So perhaps we could have more sessions like this in the future. So I just want to do a small conclude. As the saying goes, alone we can do so little. Together we believe we can do so much. So this resonates, totally fulfill that carbon credit ecosystem needs all our force, whether all the stakeholders, VBB, Carbon Project Registry, Carbon Trade Platform, even our monitoring body like academic, and last, of course, our project developer, which link out all the stakeholders. So thank you once again, and now I will pass back the floor to the MC.
Thank you to our moderator and panelists for their valuable sharing.